Good afternoon, everybody. How you guys doing? Everybody awake? You should be. It's about noon. If you're not, I've been known to make people get up and do jumping jacks. So I want to see everybody awake and paying attention, all right? Hopefully keep you guys a little bit engaged. Thank you guys so much for coming out. Where are the teachers in the room? Let me see teachers' hands. Big shout out to the teachers. Let's give them a round of applause. To the teachers, language teachers have a really tough job out there, and I just want to say thank you, because we know that you guys are often having to fight for funds and fight for space sometimes, and you guys have a lot of work. And without you guys, none of this would be possible. We wouldn't be able to teach world languages, so thank you to all the teachers out there who really pay a lot of attention to and really take a lot of pride in their students. So keep doing what you're doing. I also want to give a shout out to the folks here at Georgia State, to Bill and Sarah. Thank you for your hard work, and thank you for bringing this amazing group together today. So, as Bill mentioned, my name is Mohamed Abdel-Kader. I work at the U.S. Department of Education. I was appointed in this position September of 2014 by the White House to really think about global education for the country and for the Department of Ed. It's a pretty cool gig. I love it. I have a lot of fun with it. Why is this important? Why is this stuff important? I'm going to step back. I'll tell you first of all a little bit about what my team does, and then we'll talk about why it's important. Sorry, I got ahead of myself. So my team essentially gives out grants. So Congress gives us a bunch of money, a lot of money, not enough, but a lot, to give out to universities and colleges to help support the teaching of world languages and what we call world area studies. So we want to develop people who understand and who are experts in different parts of the world. Why is that important? Why is it important? Anybody?
For business.
For business. What else? Good. He's on to something. Anything else? Peace. Absolutely. Peace abroad, peace in our neighborhoods. We've got to have people who understand different parts of the world. That's critical. So there's a national recognition that that's important, so the federal government puts resources behind it. And how do we do that? We do that through sort of two sets of programs on our end. One are called the Title VI programs, so we fund really awesome interdisciplinary centers like the Language Resource Center here at Georgia State and like the International Business Center here at Georgia State. But we also fund a number of area study centers around the country. So there's a Latin American Studies Center right up the road at the University of Georgia. There are Middle East Studies Centers, Asian Studies Centers, African Studies Centers, Latin American Studies Centers. So if you want to learn about any part of the world and be a specialist, you can go study at one of these centers. And they're pretty cool. So they really maximize teaching. They maximize, they do a lot of research, and they actually do a lot of outreach. So for the teachers in the room, we know that sometimes professional development is tough to come by, and resources are tough to come by. So a lot of the experts at these centers develop a lot of materials that are out there. Sometimes teacher training opportunities during the summer that are there at either free or a very minimal cost. There are online modules and just tons of resources both around different world areas and language learning. So that's a little bit about the Title VI programs. If you want more information, we can get into the details in a bit. The other side of our programs are the Fulbright Age programs, excuse me. So these are really our overseas programs. How many of you guys have heard about Fulbright programs over at the State Department? All right. So these are essentially almost like scholarships that the Department of State gives for students to go study in different parts of the world. Pretty cool, right? Somebody else pays for it. That's pretty awesome. We have a variation of it at the Department of Education that we tend to focus a little more on capacity building. What that really means? We support teachers as teachers go abroad to learn and to specialize so that they can bring that stuff back into the classroom, what they've learned. We support students who really want to immerse themselves in language learning overseas, so in places like China or in Jordan or in Egypt or in Russian. We support really intense language learning opportunities, so we will pay for it. And we also support doctoral students. So when you guys eventually get to the point where you're thinking about doing a PhD and maybe you want to study like, I want to study China, we will support you if your proposal is really good. We'll support you, we'll pay for you to go do that. Because we want to develop experts, and we want those experts to be, oh geez, the mic fell. Sorry. All right, let me adjust this. So we essentially support these experts, and we support the training of experts at our universities. Make sense? Awesome. And if you guys ever want to talk about scholarship stuff afterwards, I'll stick around and we can talk about that a bit more. So, the point of my talk is, Why is an international education so important in the 21st century? Let's dig in and just talk some numbers, right? Because that is important. There's 7 billion people in the world, all right? Bill mentioned this earlier. Some people think that, you know what, everybody else in the world should speak English. But look at the numbers. 75% of the world's population doesn't speak English. So the fact that, you know, when people say, oh, everybody should learn English, it's frankly just not true. It's not happening. And those who do speak English have limited proficiency. All right? So how many of you guys what kind of careers are you guys thinking about? Anybody thinking about engineering? What was that? Forensics? Any engineers? Any business people in the room? Maybe? Yes? Okay, so when you guys go do your work, you're going to have to communicate with people from around the world. And if their English proficiency is limited, what's the other side of it? Maybe you should learn another language to communicate, right? Because it's really tough to do your job if you can't communicate. So there's a lot of people in this world that don't speak English, so we can't rely on that notion. 2, there's 320 million people in the United States, right? That's a lot of people. But 90% of Americans don't speak English. How many of you guys thinking about going to college? I want to see every hand in the room go up. Every one of you should be thinking about going to college. Everybody should be thinking about going to college. Good. Why are you guys thinking about going to college? Just to get a leg up, right? To get a leg up so you can succeed in your career, so you can support a family, support yourselves, right? So you want a leg up. 90% of Americans don't speak a second language. If you guys pick one up, that puts you in that 10%. That gives you a leg up. How many of you guys think about graduate school? Why are you thinking about graduate school? Maybe go be a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer. You want to get a master's, a medical degree. Why? Because it gives you a leg up. Same thing with a language. That'll give you a leg up. Now, just to kind of put this into perspective, there's 320 million Americans. There's 400 million people in China learning English alone. So they're prioritizing their language learning. They're learning a second language. So let's just kind of put that into perspective. That's a lot of people, right? Yeah, that's a lot of people. So let's dig into this. Let's talk about some global issues. How many of you guys have been watching the news lately? You guys aware of Ebola and Zika and SARS and Middle East respiratory syndrome, all these kind of scary diseases, right? How many of you guys are thinking about like immunology or working on disease control, anything like that? I see a few hands, right? You guys know what the CDC is? The Centers for Disease Control right down the street? They're the guys who think about, you know, putting an end to diseases. The CDC will tell you, when they think about all these diseases and all these scary bugs moving around the room, well, how do we put an end to that? It's not just a function of immunology or epidemiology or having an MD. You've got to understand the world. You've got to have the tools. You've got to be able to understand how these diseases move around the world, and you have to understand the languages that are spoken in these little villages. So what happens if a doctor who's going off to West Africa to deal with Ebola goes off into that small village and they don't speak English, but that doctor only speaks English? I'll tell you, I wouldn't want to be that doctor. I want to be able to communicate with the patients because it makes you a lot more effective, right? It makes sense. Now, what about from those experts who are trying to coordinate how the medicine is going to get to where it needs to go? You got to be able to coordinate, right? Or else your medicine shipment's going to end up in the wrong village. You don't want to do that. What about climate change? How many of you guys think about climate change? Pretty serious, right? Pretty serious issue. We're all going to have to deal with it. We're all in this together. All right, we got somebody shaking his head. But climate change is a pretty serious issue. Go talk to any of the scientists. But it's not just about science and economics in terms of dealing with it. How do we tackle climate change if we don't have these global skills? How do you tackle climate change if you don't understand the way oil is produced and consumed around the world? How do we tackle climate change if we don't understand deforestation in Brazil or in Indonesia? What about consumer habits in India and China? Right? These are emerging markets, they're new economies. We keep hearing about the rise of India and the rise of China. How do we tackle climate change if we don't understand how other people are consuming? You guys remember a couple of months back, there was a big group of officials who got together in Paris and negotiated this big climate change treaty. You guys remember that, right? Yeah. So this is a picture from the climate change conference. You see all these flags? I can tell you, it wasn't just English being spoken in the hall. So these are like the keys to unlocking the door. You've got to be able to communicate with folks from different backgrounds to tackle the world's biggest challenges. Because we need you guys to do that. I can't do this alone. The president can't do this alone. Congress can't do this alone. We all have to be a part of this. And as you guys grow in your careers, some of you guys are going to be curing cancer. Some of you guys are going to be dealing with climate change. Some of you guys are going to have to go build bridges. You got to have these skills because you're going to have to work with people from all over the world. That's the reality of the world we live in. Globalization isn't going anywhere. So let's keep going. How many of you guys think about going into business? A couple of hands went up. So on the bottom end, 1 in 5 American jobs are tied to global trade. 1 in 5 at the very least. But in a city like Atlanta, I can tell you it's a heck of a lot more with companies like Delta and Home Depot and the CDC here. You have tons of global companies right here in your backyard. Mercedes is nearby, Porsche right up the street in South Carolina, BMW and Microsoft and Boeing. All these global companies. So you've got to have these skills. 95% of the world's consumers, 95% of the world's customers are outside of the US. So if you're a business person, would you want to exclude 95% of your customers? No. That's just bad business. So your global skills they've got to be on point, they've got to be there so you can reach these folks, so you can be successful. So what's that mean for American business? It's not enough for you to just go get a finance degree these days. And what if your company sends you to Shanghai? What if they send you to Dubai? Are you going to be able to communicate? You're going to be able to speak the language? It's not just about finance. If you're an engineer, anybody want to be an engineer? Right? If you got to go build a bridge, a company like Bechtel or General Electric hires you and says, hey, I want you to go build a power plant outside of Cairo. Can you communicate with everybody there? You've got to learn those skills because it makes your job a heck of a lot easier. Right? Now let's keep going. So what skills are required to get in the door at, say, one of these companies or one of these employers? Right? Maybe you need an engineering degree to hop in the door, and that's important. That's great. These STEM skills are very important. What skills are required to advance there? So think about some of the big business executives that you know of. Guy who's in charge of General Electric or the guy who's at Coca-Cola right here down the street. What makes them successful? They're global leaders. They think about all the challenges in the world, right? They think about how their business impacts different countries and how they connect. So they've got a global mindset. That's what I want to encourage you guys to think about is, yeah, go get a science degree, but couple it with a world language. You can do the two together. So every issue that we tackle, again, whether it's climate change or whether it's business or whether it's a global public health issue, requires an understanding of the global context and the local context. Even here in Atlanta, this is a global city. How many languages have you guys heard just kind of walking around the shopping mall? Right? You hear a lot of languages. How many languages are spoken in your schools? From your peers and your neighbors? You hear a lot of that. When you guys go to the grocery store with your moms, how many languages are you hearing? Quite a bit. So even here at home, we've got to think globally. More importantly is we've got to be able to communicate effectively across those borders. So even here at home, in 2006, 43% of the total student population, this is 10 years ago, folks, of the enrollment in public schools was minority students. That's 10 years ago. So today, clearly that number is likely risen. So what does this mean for our teachers? What does this mean for the way we teach? What does this mean for the dynamics in our classrooms? How many of you guys want to be educators? It's a very important job. You guys have to think about these issues because our neighborhoods are changing. And what about public health? I saw a few hands go up. If you guys want to be doctors and nurses, right? If you guys want to work in hospitals and public health, also a very, very, very important profession. But you guys are probably going to have to treat patients from all over the world, right? Because our neighborhoods, again, look so different. Patients who maybe have traveled overseas and, drank some water that wasn't really great. And you've got to understand that. You've got to understand the bugs that are in that water. So you have to have a regional context to understand immunology in a global context and in different parts of the world. Those skills are critical. Or what about just being able to tell a patient who doesn't speak English, hey, you're going to be all right. We got you taken care of. That's important, right, for patient care. So you got to think about all that. And let's keep going. How many of you guys want to be entrepreneurs? Anybody want to be an entrepreneur? So even here at home, if you're not going to leave Atlanta, you think, you know what, I love Atlanta, it's the Peach State, I love the Peach State, I'm just going to stick around. You still have to think globally. Why? Because the products that you are maybe making might be manufactured overseas. You got to think about global competition. You got to think about things like currency and how that affects your business, right? So these global issues are really going to affect you. Who's heard of this company? Oh, come on, that's it. Come on, come on. Who's heard of this company? How many of you guys use their product like every 10 minutes? Okay. So this little dorm room, these guys started up as in a dorm room. You guys know that, right? In a dorm room up in Boston. Let's talk about this company a little bit. This company has 1.6 billion active users. That's B, billion, not million active users. Almost 84% are outside of the United States. Did you guys know that? Outside of the US and Canada. Did you guys know that? That's a lot, right? Outside of the US and Canada. They have 14 domestic offices and 36 international offices. They actually have more offices outside of the US and Canada than they do here. Isn't that nuts? Yeah. So if Facebook was a country, it would be the largest country in the world. How many people live in China? 1.3 billion. So if Facebook was a country, it would be the biggest country in the world. Isn't that kind of nuts? Who knows who this guy is? Who's that guy? Right, Mark. This is my buddy Mark. Let's talk about Mark. So Mark Zuckerberg is the head of Facebook. So again, he started it in a little dorm room, but now he's got to think about these global issues, right? He's got to think about the users' languages, because if he's in all these countries, not everybody speaks English, so Facebook's got to be able to adapt to these languages. He's got to think about maybe censorship issues in other countries. He has to think about holidays, so you know when you get the little Christmas filter that pops up, he also has to think about other holidays in different parts of the world, because that's his usership. What about his employees in other countries? They got to get paid, and not everybody takes dollars. So he's got to think about how to pay his employees in other countries. He's got to think about things like refugee issues that pop up that now we use social media for to track people, to make sure they're safe as they do when earthquakes happen. He's got to think about compliance with local laws. He has to think about emerging markets. So maybe that rural village in India that doesn't have a cell phone tower. So they may not be able to get on board because their mobile phones aren't connecting with data. They've got to think about that to reach new users. Right? So it's kind of cool to think about a company like Facebook that started in a dorm room that all of a sudden has to take into account all of these global factors. So what I'm trying to tell you is you guys think about your education. Make some room in there to study in a global context, because these are the skills you need to succeed. This is just one small example. So let's talk about opportunity and access. And this discussion is probably geared a little bit more towards the teachers, although I want you guys as students to think about it. How many of you guys think about social justice issues as students? That's important. So at the department, you probably heard Secretary King, my boss, talk a lot about opportunity and access. You've heard President Obama talk a lot about it, especially in an educational context. Well, more and more, I think we see a lot of school districts that are trimming social studies budgets. They're trimming language learning budgets across the country. I see some of the teachers nodding their heads. Why is this important? Why is this important? Why is this important for access and equity? Let's go back to the statistic I showed a little bit ago. If so many jobs in this country are tied to global trade, and these types of classes are maybe some of the only places in our schools where students are being exposed to global issues. Maybe they don't get them, and maybe they don't have the language requirements to apply to some four-year institutions that may have a language requirement. Some universities still have a 2-year language requirement for high school students as they apply. Well, if they don't have that, what happens? Maybe they go to a community college, and there's some awesome community colleges out there. But a lot of community colleges also may not have the language capability. They may not have the resource to send students abroad to gain that immersive global experience. So again, what happens then when these students are not able to be as competitive for all those jobs that are tied to global trade that may require these global skills? It's very much a question of access and equity. There's a social justice discussion to be had around the way we teach languages. So, my question for you is, will our students enter the workforce with global readiness and language fluency? And what implications does this have on our national security? What implication does it have on our economic competitiveness? And what about our neighborhoods? Right? So we're having a discussion now as a country about what it means to be part of the American fabric, right? You guys watch the news. I'm sure you've seen some of the campaign discussions. I'm not going to get into the campaigns, but we've really been talking a lot about what it means to be an American and who is an American. And language is a big part of that, and our global perspectives are part of that, being able to understand one another and communicate with people who may have come from different countries. or have different faith traditions. There are implications for that here at home, folks. So this stuff is really, really, really critical. Now, I'll spend a few minutes on this, just so you all know, primarily for the teachers in the room who may be thinking about grant opportunities. Plenty of opportunities here represented for grant opportunities for your schools, for your school districts, also for local community colleges and universities to apply for grants that will also extend to your schools and hopefully continue to enhance the work that you all are doing. So just to keep that in mind for the students in the room, at some point, some of you guys may want to go abroad. Have any of you guys thought about maybe studying abroad at some point? Awesome. I'm so happy to see all these hands abroad. But I know when I was a student a couple years ago, I went to school at Clemson. You guys know where Clemson is? Right up there. We have any Clemson fans in the room? Good. I'm a big Clemson fan. It was a tough loss in January, tough football game. But when I was at Clemson, I was really worried about going abroad because it was expensive and I just didn't have the money. And frankly, I didn't know about all the resources that were out there. And there's tons and tons and tons of scholarship money out there. Not just, there's some from the Department of Education, but also from the US Department of State and the Department of Defense. There's a ton of money out there and there's a lot of scholarships to help you guys get abroad. If you want to learn a language, if you want to immerse yourselves. How many of you guys have ever wanted to go to China? Anybody ever wanted to go to Kenya or go to Egypt or go to Paris? There's a lot of money out there to support you guys. So once you guys get to college, and actually in some cases actually beforehand, do some research online about scholarships to support international education, to support you guys going abroad. Because I'd love to see each and every one of you go abroad and really, really, really dig deep into a language and have an amazing experience. I'm going to close with this last slide right here. What's the significance of this? So I think we've done a great job in this country of having a great education system. We have great universities. Generally speaking, we have a pretty good K-12 system. Obviously, we still got some work to do. But what we want to do is we want to prep you so that you can adapt to the road of life, right? But in the world that we live in, the world has inherently become globalized, right? Does everybody agree on that? Everybody agrees about that, right? Globalization's here to stay. That's not going anywhere. So we've prepared, hopefully we've prepared you like a really nice Escalade, right? You're very comfortable, you've got a steering wheel, but the road ahead of you is globalized. And what we sometimes forget to do is put the tires on. We forget about the skills that are going to help you succeed in that global environment, which are language learning and global competencies. So I'll encourage you guys, if you guys are thinking about engineering, if you're thinking about business, if you're thinking about medicine, that's awesome. But don't forget about incorporating languages. Don't forget about incorporating a global perspective into your studies. I think it's going to make you a heck of a lot more successful and a heck of a lot more prepared for the world that's out there. So we'll close with this. For those of you guys, how many of you guys are on Twitter? If you are, follow us on @GlobalEd. And the reason I say that is not because we don't just tweet out pictures of kittens playing the piano. We actually tweet out a lot of cool articles, and occasionally kittens will pop up. But we actually tweet out a lot of scholarship opportunities. And for the teachers, a lot of professional development opportunities. We leverage a lot of work that's being done at our national resource centers and our language resource centers and our international business centers. So that's really there for the teachers. We know professional development is tough to come by. And for the students, pay attention to it because there's always cool articles about why international education is important or highlighting different things at different universities. As you guys think about applying to colleges, hopefully that'll be helpful for you guys. Cool? I'm going to stick around if you guys have any questions. Would love to chat with you. But that's all that I've got to say. So thank you so much for having me here. Thank you to the teachers, and thank you to Bill and Sarah.